Hello everyone. Today we're going to discuss what's really wrong with the Indian economy, the reasons behind the Indian economy slowdown, and how does modern monetary theory framework answers and addresses them. The main point of the presentation are going to be, we'll start with a very small brief on modern monetary theory framework. We'll see what is wrong with the Indian economy, the reasons behind this, and how the governments of past and present played their part in this, and also some suggestions for the governments of present, what policy tools it can use in budget or otherwise as under the modern monetary theory framework to address this problem. What's the core idea of MMT or modern monetary theory? Government with its sovereign and fiat money should expand its fiscal deficit and print it over in order to achieve its objective of full employment. The only limit to this government aim is posed by inflation. Government spending, if it does it in this way, will not crowd out the private investment. And taxes, and this is very important, taxes is not a revenue collection medium in this framework. Rather, it's a demand control and thus inflation control tool for the government. Details on modern monetary theory presentation is given, the link to that is given in the description. You may go through that in order to fully appreciate this particular presentation. Today we are in a monetary system, which is credit-based monetary system. It's very different from the commodity-based monetary system that we left in 1971. Under this system, let's see how money is created in the economy. A person goes to the bank to get some loan. Now the bank takes from the person a collateral, which can be an asset, inventory, and in lieu of that, the bank grants him a loan. And voila, money is created in the economy. Because as the name suggests in this system, credit is money. So remember, in this system, money is created by the banks out of thin air. Deposits are just needed to balance the books of the banks. And remember this, deposits are not needed to create money. They are not. In fact, deposits are an outcome of the money created by banks out of thin air. For more details, check out the money presentation. Again, the link will be in the description. Now let's see how the money grows in this system. So the person who has taken the loan from the bank invests in his business, and his business luckily grows. Now the person sees future demand and he approaches the bank for more loan. The bank, since the business already has grown and the person has a bigger collateral to offer, the banks give him a bigger loan, and voila, more money is created in the economy. But now comes the problem in the form of inflation. How? Let's see. Now, the person has taken loan from the bank. This time he also invests in business. However, this time, because of some external circumstances or due to his own wrong decisions, the business turns out bad, a malinvestment. Or the person wrongly speculates in the real estate market. He invests money in the real estate. Or worse, he just spends it on himself. In all three scenarios, the goods or services are not created as they should have been in the economy. However, we do have credit or money supply that has already been created in the economy. So, the economy has more money supply than goods and services, and due to this mismatch, inflation happens. Let's look at the second scenario. This time again, the person either invests his money in the business, which unfortunately doesn't grow. He invests the money in real estate, which, luck good for him, rises in price. This asset price rise. In both circumstances, he approaches the bank for more loan. The bank grants them a bigger loan in both cases. This, at least in the former case, is known as what we call evergreening of loan. What happens is, with this bigger loan, the person pays back to the bank the old loan, and the remaining money he uses either, let's say, for putting up his old business on road, investing again more in the real estate market, or the third scenario that we just saw, investing or spending the money on himself. In all cases, again, the required goods and services are not produced, but more credit is created in the economy, leading again to more inflation. So, points to note: if this phenomenon is limited to a few companies, if there are few bad apples, that is, or a sector, then other companies and other sectors can pick up the slack and cater to this demand that was not fulfilled, thus reducing that supply-demand mismatch and keeping a lid on the inflation. However, if this phenomenon is more broad-based, long-term and overall in the economy, then inflation is more entrenched. That only means one thing: there are high levels of malinvestment in the economy. And this will, as you'll see in the further slides, leads to wealth transfer, ultimately deflation and economic slowdown. We'll also talk about the government actions in conjugation with this. Now, this has been the inflation graph for India over the last decade. Have a look at this first half of it. Look at the high entrenched inflation. This was where the morasses Indian economy started. High inflation, entrenched wealth transfer, malinvestment in the economy. And then we come to the second half, which we'll see how it comes in the future in the further slides. Now, what happens to credit that was generated by the bank and was causing inflation? Now, so let's say the business or the person has failed, and even now the evergreening of loans that was happening for him has stopped. The asset market that was growing has collapsed. He has no money no longer to invest further. And in third case, anyways, he has wasted money, spent on himself. Now a bank is asking for their loan back, but he has no money to return. Then what happens? Here's what happens when he has no money to return. The banks take his factory, if it has, or whatever assets he has, takes it and gives it over to a third party. Here, as we see, wealth transfer is happening from person A to person B. Also, in this process, some credit gets destroyed because the handing over of the assets will not exactly take place at market prices, and so some deflationary pressures are put in the economy, and some slowdown can occur because of that. Thankfully, due to the reforms that that have just been passed a few years back, that the IBC, this process of transferring the assets is becoming little more better. Otherwise, even this simple process used to take time and was very hard to achieve. And if this is not achieved, we are in a bigger mess. And let's see how. Let's say the second scenario. In this case, even the collateral value is insufficient for the banks to recover the loans. Then what happens? Enter the investors. They will start losing money. How? Well, because here the bank has to issue more equity, or in some cases debt also, to raise the money to cover its losses in the balance sheet. That means more credit destruction takes place, and this can lead to a bigger economic slowdown. And the third scenario, which is a bigger mess, this time even the equity value is insufficient to cover the losses. This time the government has to step in, pretty much what is happening in the Indian economy. The government steps in and buys equity into the banks. How does the government able to buy equity from the bank? Well, the taxpayer money. The government uses taxpayer money to buy equity from the bank. Wealth is being transferred from the taxpayers now, and so since wealth is being transferred from the taxpayer, this leads to a slowdown in the Indian economy. Hence, if this is what the government has to do, it's very important that it takes punitive actions against the person responsible for this. Otherwise, this phenomenon will keep on repeating itself. And also, the government has to take this step, because if it doesn't, then the fourth case will happen, which is the worst of them all. Here, the banks have to write off huge amount of bad loans, which means the depositors and common people lose money. This huge credit destruction leads to big deflationary pressure in the economy and can lead to an economic crash, something what we saw in 2008 in the financial crisis of the world. Now, what has been the scenario of the last 45 years? As we can summarize, the government tightened the screws around the black money. It introduced more compliances and frameworks like GST, demonetization, and IBC. This meant that already stretched real estate valuations saw decline. So the real estate market that was pretty hot started crashing. Decline in real estate prices and the decline in the black money saw the consumer demand, especially in the upper luxury goods section, started to come down. Also, the businesses who took loan because of to invest in and grow their businesses, but instead misdirected them to the real estate market, started facing trouble in returning them back. As we saw, because the evergreening of loan also stopped. Also, the slowdown in real estate had a direct impact on unemployment, because it employs a lot of labor. Now, this is okay, this is fine. This can lead to some pain. But what one critical error that this government made, which was that let's first understand the role of money and government in the current system. The government has monopoly over the money supply in the economy. Why? Because it can print money. How it can do that? Well, the government can issue debt whenever it has fiscal deficit. That means its expenditure is more than its income. It can sell the debt, and the central bank, for that matter any central bank in the world, for its government, can buy the debt. How? By printing money. Just typing in a few keywords, printing money and buying the debt with this money, and so indirectly giving that freshly printed money to the government. This is also in modern day context called QE, or quantitative easing. And of course, it has the monopoly to collect taxes in the economy. So, for government, unlike for us, money has no store of value. Why do I say that? Well, think about it. If you have something that is theoretically infinite, potentially you can have it at any time, would it be of any store of value for you? Would you really have any store of value for you at all? The answer is no, of course not. So for government, money is basically a tool to allocate resources and transfer wealth. And taxes is a tool to change demand and hence inflation in the economy. How? Well, the government can take money from person A in form of taxes and give it to person B as welfare measures. This is a transfer of wealth. It can increase the fiscal deficit and print over the money and hand out again to person B, which is again a kind of transfer of wealth. Or it can increase the taxes. The increased taxes will reduce demand, and reduced demand will lead to reduction in inflation. Or it can reduce the taxes, which will increase the demand, and hence increase the growth. I repeat again, taxes in credit-based monetary system and under the modern monetary setup are no longer revenue collection medium, but inflation and demand and hence inflation control medium, as well as a wealth transfer medium. That's it. The old mindset of taxes being a revenue collection medium comes from the commodity era mindset, which has to be thrown away in this credit-based money and modern monetary setup. Now, this is where the critical error of the government happened. First of all, it redesigned the GDP calculation matrix. Now I understand that you may want to sell the India story to the world and advertise it to get foreign investment. However, the biggest folly you make is when you fall for your own propaganda. And this is what happened. In spite of facing severe credit slowdown in the economy, the government reduced the fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP. Why? If I have to take a guess, I believe it's because they have the economic advisors who still believe in old school economics, the old Washington consensus, which was relevant for commodity-based money era, but are no longer relevant, again I repeat, for the credit-based money era. Inflation was benign, as we saw a few slides back, but still the taxes were not reduced. Still the fiscal deficit as percentage of GDP was not increased when they should have been. To increase the growth, that would have led to demand increase and increased economic growth in the economy. There were also mistakes made by Central Bank of India. Why? Interest rates were first of all kept high by the central bank when they should have been reduced. And this was really shocking for large part, and this was part of some controversy. For some time, the RBI refused to part with its reserves that were meant to help the banks in distress. Now, were the banks in distress because of these bad loans that were accumulating in the economy? Wasn't the government using the taxpayer money to backstop the banks? It was. And the RBI should have used its reserves to help in that part. It did, but after a long cajoling and lots of controversy. Now you can ask, obviously, okay, fine, the government should do that. But as we see, inflation has increased, isn't it? So can we still go for it? Well, it makes the picture a little muddy, I agree with you. However, as we see for now, inflation has increased due to food price increases. This inflation is generally transitory or temporary in nature. Core inflation, as we still see, is still benign. Although it's a tougher call to make than last few years, but I would still say the government should reduce taxes and increase its spend on, especially on infrastructure, to revive the economy in the budget or otherwise. So, final points of this presentation. To conclude, the government was right in breaking the back of the malpractices of the past, like evergreening of loans in the credit markets and breaking the nexus of black money and real estate, which has happened at least to some extent, which is good. It was also correct in pursuing the punitive actions against wrongdoers, and it should pursue it more aggressively for sure, so that these issues don't reoccur in the Indian economy and Indian economy is structurally improved. Again, it did the right thing in bringing the systematic frameworks like GST, e-governance, Indian bankruptcy codes. However, its folly is in its macroeconomic thinking. Tax in credit-based monetary setup is not a tool for revenue for the government to collect. It's a tool for inflation control by demand modification. And it's a tool of wealth transfer. That's it. For the government, money has no store of value today. So government should not fuss too much about fiscal deficit. Get out of this Washington consensus era, especially if in the low inflation environment. Now some may ask that, okay, fine, then why doesn't the government should also increase spends on health and poverty? Well, it should certainly increase it, but then some may ask, why not double it? Well, for that, you have to watch the presentation on Modern Monetary Theory or MMT. The link again is in the description. Thank you very much for watching the presentation. Do subscribe if you like the content and comment in case you have any queries. Thanks a lot.